robberies. There's been some home invasions and sort of kidnapping situations where people have been tied up in their basement while people, fill up bags of cash. So it's a public safety issue when you create an industry like this that has this much cash laying around and no bank to put it in. It also makes it difficult for our state revenue department to audit and regulate these businesses when they're operating purely on cash. When there's no audit trail, no paper trail at a bank that we can go back and verify, where all the money is coming and going. And so solving this problem, I think, one, is in the public interest for public safety reasons because of just the potential for crime and robberies and such. But two, also I think it's in the public interest because this is going to help us keep this industry well regulated and let us know exactly, who's investing and where the money's going and is the system that we've set up working. So I've got a bill to try to create a special kind of bank called a financial cooperative just to serve these businesses. There's still a whole lot of problems, and ultimately federal law and the U.S. Department of Justice is really where the problem comes from and where the best solution is going to come from. But as a stopgap measure, I'm going to try and create a bank that these dispensaries and grows and product manufacturers can at least put their money in for safety and security. I brought with me a handout about the budget, and I don't know if you want to hear just a little bit about the budget before we open up for questions, but I know we all want to hear your questions and the things that are on your mind. But let me just, Owen, could you help me pass these around? Let me just say a couple things about the budget process. This sheet I'm passing out, it's actually something my office pasted together, 2 different documents. The top is an excerpt from the last quarterly economic projections that the legislature receives. Every quarter, our economists project for us how the economy is doing and how much tax revenue will be coming into the state because of that. And in December, we actually got some really good news in that economic projection. And because of that, where the governor's budget originally was going to make us a cut to K-12 education, with this new news that the tax revenues are returning and on the rise, the governor's withdrawn his request to cut the K-12 budget because we've got more money available to spend this year. And so the top half of this document is a little excerpt from that December revenue forecast that talks about some of the new revenues that are available. The bottom half of the document is actually just a little pie chart that sort of shows you where your tax dollars and fees that you pay for government services, how they are funding state government in the current fiscal year. And it's just kind of interesting to see that health and human services and education are the 2 biggest slices of that pie chart down there. But then there's some other things like prisons and the court system and higher education, that also have some nice little slices of the pie. We still are in a situation where, despite the fact that we're getting good news and tax revenues are starting to rise again, we still have a structural deficit or a gap in our budget between how much money is coming in taxes and fees and what the obligations of the state are to fund the ongoing operation of government. And so even if we're not going to make any cuts to K-12, there are other areas of the budget that are slated for a cut this year. Just one I'll just toss out there. Originally the governor had proposed to address this budget shortfall by cutting $60 million from the higher ed budget. Because of this revenue estimate in December with money returning, he has amended his budget request, and it's pending in front of the Budget Committee right now, to only cut $30 million out of higher ed instead of $60. And actually, the original proposal was going to take $30 million out of operating monies for all of our college and university campuses across the state, and he was going to take the other $30 million out of student financial aid. And the budget amendment he's turned in withdrew the request to cut financial aid, so that the financial aid budget will stay flat with no cut, but the operating budgets of all the various institutions across the state are being slated for a $30 million cut. There's some really hard decisions to make and some things that aren't pleasant. And when we talk about the higher ed budget, it's really sad how much that's declined in recent years. And I don't know how much lower we can go and still say that we have public colleges and public universities universities. We're not on a good path there, but there are a lot of really bad choices. And I could bore you and make your eyes glaze over with 15 or 20 other things that are slated for cuts that I'm trying to figure out ways to lessen the cut or use some of these new monies to avoid cuts in a whole variety of programs. But for me, things that are about prevention, things that provide health and human services to low income and vulnerable populations, those are things I really care about and worked really hard to try to learn as much as I can about, make sure we do everything we can to protect them.
And I'll just say a couple things about the budget, because being on the JBC for 3 years, I miss it. That's where my passion is. But two of the things, a couple things. One, on higher ed, I just want to mention a few things. For the first time 2 years ago, we spent more on corrections than we did on higher ed. Which is a really sad state of affairs for our state, that we're spending more to put people in prison than to educate people in the higher ed system. And that trend is unfortunately not changing. We are cutting higher education. We're also, luckily, have actually seen a reduction now 2 years and projected 3 years in a row, reduction in our prison population because of some of the things Senator Steadman was talking about. So we're on the right trend there, but we're also on the same trend and a faster trend in higher education. And we talk a lot about economic development and how we can make sure that we're competitive as a state with the world and with other states. And I always tell people, if we defund our higher education system where it's completely private, which is possibly where we're going in the next couple of years if something structurally doesn't change with our budget, we can lower our tax rate, corporate tax rate, to 0. But if we don't have a public higher education system that people can afford, we're not going to attract any business here, because higher ed and an educated workforce is the key to economic development. I mean, you look at Colorado and why we do better than a lot of other states. One, it's a great place to live. We all live here, we know that. And two, we are the second or third most educated state in the country. And businesses want to be here because they want a talented and educated workforce. And if we start to lose that, we're not going to be able to compete. And so it's really that conversation about higher ed, while everyone focuses on K-12, which is essential and really important, that conversation on higher ed is just as important. And if we don't maintain that higher education system, we really are doing a long-term disservice to our state. So on that high note, I'll open up to questions. Yes?